No, but seriously, thank you so much for the invitation to come and share some stories of hope, healing, and resilience. If you had to pick, which one would be most important to you? Hope, healing, or resilience? I want you to stick to that answer as I move through my talk and I share a little bit of what hope, healing, and resilience means to me. June 2016. I had been in the St. Louis area for a few months, being recruited to join the WashU Department of Surgery, moving to Ferguson, post-Ferguson, just under 2 years after Michael Brown Jr.'s life was ended too early, less than a mile away from my new home. I was swept into discourse as a trauma surgeon around the issues of violence and race. Hope was not on the table often as I went out into community and heard what people were experiencing on a day-to-day basis. One day I was invited by Mr. James Clark, who is at the Better Family Life organization, doing work in place, hyper-local outreach to disrupt acts of violence as they were occurring in the community, doing his best to help keep people alive. And on this evening, I was invited to be on a panel representing care providers who were doing work in trauma care in the region, but also sitting side by side with community members who were directly impacted by acts of violence. I had my white coat on, I had my little name tag, and I thought I had something meaningful to share. I thought for sure if I told about the stories of being at the bedside, the blood and the guts, and the horror of what it is to deal with the aftermath of a bullet, I would compel folks to think differently about what it meant to live in community with one another. But over the course of the evening, my words fell flat. And I remember reaching out to Mr. Clark at the end of the event, talking to him about where I was working, who my boss was, and what I had hoped to see. And he's like, yeah, I know your boss. And he asked me one simple question: where you at? I remember sort of like checking myself. I think I'm here. But I realized I was stuck inside the walls of the hospital practicing at a level 1 academic trauma center that was doing incredible work to save lives, but whose presence was completely absent beyond the walls of that hospital. I took his words to heart. They really broke me in half as I thought, what did I possibly have to offer the community besides what I could do in the operating room? As I thought and I reflected on what was happening nationally around the discourse of what bullets were doing to communities, I thought about what it meant to bring the National Stop the Bleed campaign to the streets. It was a campaign that launched after the dreadful shooting that happened in Sandy Hook Elementary that decided to make community first responders able to stop life-threatening bleeding the same way the country many years before had decided to teach people CPR. And so I took the class, I reworked it, and I brought it out to the community, first sitting with Mr. Clark a year and a half later. That's how long it took to get to know him, to sit and listen, to get into a relationship, and to be in a place where I could just teach one class of 12 people how to stop the bleed. After that class, which I did at the Better Family Life Center, we passed out certificates to everybody. We took this big paper certificate, shrunk it down, and made it into a card so everyone could have one of their own. And I'll never forget, at the end of the class, taking a picture with everyone, and one of the people holding it up and said, "Doc, I'm just like you." And I realized, whoa. This was something different. This wasn't about tourniquets or gauze. It was about shifting the power of what I knew how to do in the hospital and putting it into the hands of people every day, the people who were the most likely to do something. 2 years later, 10,000 people had been trained by the organization that I founded to stop the bleed, an impact that taught me so much about what it meant to live day to day in communities, at schools, and businesses, and everywhere where bullets were potentially 1 minute away from completely changing everything of the fabric of life. And that experience galvanized me, simply starting with the decision to not walk away from a very challenging question, but to listen deeply. Fast forward to March 2020. Who remembers what was going on in March 2020? A few things, including a once-in-a-century global health reality that shook the core of everything that I had been taught, because I was not only a trauma surgeon, I practiced intensive care. At that time, I shifted my care from surgery and signed up to do community intensive care at Christian Hospital in the north of St. Louis. I remember walking through the halls and seeing a 32-bed ICU with 31 patients on a ventilator, almost all of whom were Black. I had never seen such a striking display, and the wild thing was that the halls were empty. The nurses were at their desks, programming pumps across the walls of the ICU rooms, and there was no families. It was deafeningly silent, and I became terrified of what this new reality would mean for the people who were most vulnerable to such a disease. Around that time, a friend of mine, Adelaide Lancaster, who is the wife of one of the cardiac surgery residents that I had been working with, and also a tremendous entrepreneur and leader in the community. She had a very simple question for me as I was preparing to enter into this very different kind of practice. She said, she texted me, "Do you want some N95s?" And I was like, well, I'm not an infectious disease doctor. This is not necessarily my specialty. I don't know a whole lot of epidemiology. I don't exactly even know what this virus and disease is, and I really don't know if I can do anything with it. But I let that trouble me. And I once again grappled with the question of what she was offering, because she had galvanized her community to donate as many masks, gloves, sanitizers, and anything that she could find to try to support where she knew it was most needed, recognizing that her husband as a provider was going to be vulnerable to something that could change the life for her family and her 3 children. At first I said, I don't know. But then after I went and I walked through those halls and I saw what COVID was doing, I said yes. I said, why don't we take all the lessons we learned from stopping the bleed and switch it into stopping the virus? That work became the sort of operating arm of an incredible regional response called Prepare STL, which did an enormous amount of work in education, distribution, and true preparation to bring, once again, the best of what was inside the hospital to the community. That effort did a lot of hours of teaching and many, many hours of outreach, including a new focus amongst people who were housing unstable and people who were caring for children and people who were not born in this country. That work, whether it was addressing language or access, in every way galvanized the distribution of over 100,000 PPE kits. Again, this body of work all bringing the resource that I had known outside the hospital that began with a simple question. Fast forward to May 17th, 2025, the day after the May 16th EF3 tornado that tore through the heart of St. Louis. I was doing outreach with this now robust machinery of an organization that had grown from those PPE kits and those Stop the Bleed moments. We were reaching out in Fountain Park, not far from here, trying to support and assist our neighbors who had been devastated in the 5 minutes that 150-mile wind tore through the bricks and the mortar and the fabric of that community. About 1 or 2 in the afternoon, I got a text message. I got to be careful answering my phone. I got a text message from Rachel D'Souza, who is a champion of many things, including community philanthropy, but she also is a true advocate for making sure people are connected to what they need. And she said to me, "Are you able to talk to World Central Kitchen?" And I'm like, okay. I mean, I know where I'm at, and I think I know something about masks, but I don't know anything about NGOs. What is going on? Like, this doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm just out here passing out some water, talking to people, caring about them, loving on them, being present, but I don't even understand the magnitude of what you're asking me. And it was really, really tempting one more time to say, I don't know, and I don't have an answer. But once again, I said yes. And just a few hours later, I got a message from my alderwoman, Shamim Clark-Hubbard, asking if we could possibly bring some sort of resource to the neighbors who were caught in an 8-story senior building where there was no power and there was no way for them to even get down from the 8th floor, as many of them required mobility assistance. My wife and I, in the middle of the night, took hot sandwiches from up late, up those 8 floors, looking door after door and interacting with person after person and hearing the unbelievable needs that they were displaying. That galvanized me to recognize that no matter how prepared I did or didn't feel for the moment, I needed to once again lend my presence. I worked with a whole lot of different organizations over the course of many months to create a food stability access point in which 25,000 meals have now been distributed through that work in Fountain Park. Now, whether it's Stop the Bleed kits or PPE kits or meals, this isn't really so much about numbers. But I think it's a really simple idea that I want to first share with you about what it means to lead. Because so often we think of leadership as what I'm doing right now, right? I'm talking to you, you're listening, right? So I'm leading. But really, I think this simple message would do us all a whole lot of good, especially when we sit inside the academy where there's pressure, especially when we're trying to become professionals where we're supposed to be right. You got, in general, 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in according to the proportion to which you were given them, right? But how often do we feel all this pressure to dynamically declare what's right, to be in front, to speak and lead with our own clarity and thoughts? So much of what I have been able to do in this city and in individual communities and with individual patients is through the power of listening. Now, we could stop, and we could probably have a good conversation now about leadership. How do you listen? How do you get close enough to listen? How do you access what it is to listen actively? All of these things around empathy, all of these things around emotional intelligence, maybe help us be better leaders. But is that a value that you can teach? Is this really about teaching folks how to be better leaders? Or is it in the act of leading that we teach ourselves what we value most? Because the core component of every one of those asks, those texts, and those phone calls was a profound call to action, whether it was as a visible academic surgeon or as a community health provider or someone on the street doing outreach. And in those times of crisis, I was called to deep action. The thing is, whether it was Stop the Bleed kits, masks, or meals, the uncertainty is the part they don't tell you about. We don't talk enough about the soul-crushing burden of being in times of leadership where there's a fork in the road and we're not sure what to do, whether it's in the smallest thing, like how we're going to interact with people we love, or the biggest thing about what we're going to focus on academically, what job we're going to take, and how we're going to be in the world. And it's in the midst of that uncertainty we can frequently feel the overwhelming pressure to be right. But I have found in my leadership the extent of my ability to lead is, again, directly proportional to my willingness to be wrong. And I'm telling you, and I tell my wife this every day, I mess up more times before she wakes up than she will the whole month because I'm always getting into something. But it's that willingness to stand both in humility, to be wrong, but also striving endlessly for excellence. And in that uncertainty, it's not necessarily that I've become a better leader, but every time I've had to lead myself through those moments of uncertainty, I've gotten more clear on what I believe. To be a purpose-driven leader, to lead with purpose, I think you got to get real clear on what you believe and why you're showing up in any way. I talk a lot about the concept of 4 a.m. or 2 a.m. moments. 2 a.m. moments happen no matter what it is and what you're doing, whether it's the snot on your baby's face or the ruptured appendix in the emergency department or the really hard decision to go ahead and pay that bill and wait on this one and pray that something amazing happens in between. This is the truth of what it is to lead, and it's really more about what you believe. And for me, one of the core tenets that's come out of this work in all these different ways that I've shown up to questions I've been asked is the concept of radical generosity. Now, people don't like this one sometimes. This is a tough concept because they imagine like someone like really, really intense about their generosity, right? Radical generosity. Like I'm super generous. Like I'm just giving stuff away all the time. But that's not what it is at all. The word radical is a descriptor of the generosity, which means to the root. It means to the fractal. It means to the DNA. It means committing in everything I do to the radical act of saying yes to people and their worth. It is a loving act of presence that literally lines each step. And here's what I love about leading in this way. It's okay to be wrong when you center that radical generosity, because that yes is so often a yes that can lead to another chance to get it right. And this is what I think leading in uncertainty has most shown me. Let's take it back a step to 2019. The summer of 2019 was a very hard summer for St. Louis, harder in some ways than the summer of 2014 and 2015. Because in that summer, 25 children in the region lost their lives to a bullet. I can remember the weight that I felt each time I was in the hospital trying to comfort myself, comfort the residents, comfort the patients, and all the while find a way to keep showing up to tragedy after tragedy. That fall, I was invited to testify in front of the Honorable John Lewis in the House Ways and Means Committee to talk about the impact of what this meant for us as a people. Now, he was focusing on a bipartisan approach to the economics of what was happening in our country, but I focused on the deeper truth that we were managing every day a disease with no name that had become the leading cause of death in black men under 45 and the leading cause of death of young people. What do I mean by that? Now, frequently, this reality is called homicide or suicide or law enforcement-related deaths or unintentional deaths. It's called gun violence. It's called everything but what it actually is. And over, whether it was the Stop the Bleed classes or the bedside care that I was giving, I was hearing the same thing from so many people who were suffering from this disease. I just want someone to listen, especially the young people, over and over and over again, feeling wildly misunderstood. But over and over and over again, having their disease described as an act of violence and not an injury worthy of care. I took that to heart, and I started grappling once again with the questions that my patients and my community was over and over and again showing me. And I switched the name to something that as a surgeon made sense to me, bullet-related injury. Because I had never seen the firearm that had ever injured any of my patients, but I had taken out more bullets than I cared to remember. And I could tell that it wasn't even just the people who were physically injured, it was the ones around them who felt it just as much. And so I grappled with what it would mean to provide a space of care for people with bullet-related injury. And one day, like a light bulb, in the middle of the night on call, it went off in my head. I added a C and called it the brick. I took this idea to my supervisor, actually my supervisor's supervisor, and I presented this concept. And I could remember being in a meeting and being told, no one's going to come to your clinic because of the shoddy circumstances under which they were injured in the first place. We don't need to do this. That was hard. Because I had literally been baptized in the blood of so many dying black men. I had to tell the mothers of children so many times that their baby wasn't coming home. I had felt the pain from the amputations and the immobility, the paralysis, and the profound sense of grief and loss in the community for years and years. It was so hard to hear and listen to that. But this, I think, to me, is the real story of hope and healing and resilience. Because that one time, I didn't listen. I left the academy and started this clinic, which has now cared for over 1,000 patients. It turns out a few people did come. And this is the story of what it is to lead, because sometimes the one you need to listen to is yourself. That's what I got. Hope, healing, and resilience. I'm so happy to be here and happy to take questions that you might have. All the best.